Thank you so much for joining us. We're happy and excited to talk about our research here. This is a paper that Becky, John, and I wrote a while ago, and it's a really fun paper. We're so excited that it's getting the attention it is getting. Ultimately, this is a paper that I think speaks to the heart of how can we integrate human decision makers and AI, um, and particular in this field of forecasting. What got me very excited personally about this research is that, in forecasting, forecasting is still such a field which is influenced by human judgment. We have had great forecasting methods for the past 50 years. But if you look at any kind of forecasting systems out there in the field, there's still a lot of adjustments that are happening. And we have seen so many different ways of how adjustments are incorporated together with sort of system generated forecasts. And the method we're exploring over here, the two methods are really very simple methods. In the simplest form, they just require kind of forecasters to tag special events, that there's a sort of a 0, 1, that there's something specific affecting one period and not the other. And so it's a very simple way of eliciting human judgment. And I think what's exciting about this paper is that that actually works incredibly well. Becky, why don't you talk more about it?
Absolutely. Thanks, Enno. So really what we were thinking of as we were working on this paper is, as Enno mentioned, there are so many ways to integrate, but there's also more and more of this push to automate. And so one of the directors that we were talking to about this said pre-pandemic, we were allowing the system to drive the forecast and we trusted it to do what was right. At the start of the pandemic, it became pretty clear the system was not filling the needs of the business. Obviously, now in hindsight, we started to realize a completely automated system was not the best recipe for success. And so really what this illustrates that humans are good at using their private information that it sits outside of the model. Humans are necessary to identify this. However, what models do well is they are able to integrate all of that evidence and they're able to identify systematic bias. So the strengths of both are very complementary. And the whole idea of this integration then is, how do we use the strengths from both while we're minimizing the weaknesses of each other? So, John, I'll turn it over to you to talk about some of those different methods of integration more.
As Enno mentioned, and as Becky brought up also, we started off with, in our experience, our collective experience, the most common method of integration that we observed in practice for about 15 years straight. And then Enno and I were happy to confirm this when we did a little survey of 200 something firms, and we found that that was indeed the modal method, the most common method used in practice. But when we scanned the literature, Becky did a thorough review of this because this was also part of a dissertation. We found that there were other methods that were commonly used in practice. And so therefore, we did due diligence by examining the effectiveness of each of these. So there was quantitative correction, where the machine makes some corrections to human judgment. And then there is also a forecast combination, which harks back to the early work of Blackburg and Hoke, where a simple average was found to outperform both the machine and the human. And then finally, in the input to model building, where human beings gave information about influences on demand. The last two methods of integration that we had, which were integrative judgment learning, where a human being made an estimate of an effect, but also recorded the fact that they did expect that effect. And finally, that human beings are good at certain things, they're not necessarily good at computing these numbers. And therefore, how about we just take the signal alone? Just the mere fact that there is going to be an event. And that was what turned into the human-guided learning. And we were also excited then to follow this up with some industry data. And I'm going to let my co-authors take the lead on explaining, on talking about that a little bit.
Okay, so we were able to partner with a large multinational retailer on what they are currently doing in their forecasting process. And so we identified that judgmental adjustment is still that process, regardless of what kind of model is being used. So in this case, we partnered with a company that is actually using a sophisticated machine learning model. They're using ensemble machine learning methods. And so that includes Gaussian processes, hierarchical modeling. And really what they're doing is still planners are receiving this output and are adjusting. But as they adjust, what they're doing is they are recording what their reason is for adjusting. And what we find is that across the board, integrative judgment learning and human guided learning are more accurate. And actually, what's really interesting is they're even more accurate than that system forecasted, that ensemble machine learning method that the firm is using. So we show that there is value that humans are bringing to forecasts. Planners do have that extra private information. It just really matters how that private information is incorporated, how the two are integrated together. When we separate out the reasons, we find that actually the two most adjusted reasons are reasons where human guided learning is significantly more accurate than integrative judgment, which throughout the laboratory experiment and in the other reasons, there's not a significant difference between the two. But because human guided learning does require more data really in order to train, because we're taking it down to that 0-1 signal, we do show that when there is that amount of data that's necessary to train and then be utilized, human guided learning actually can be more accurate, which is pretty significant and interesting finding considering how simple the idea actually is. And I'll turn it over to you from here.
Thank you so much. I hope all of you enjoyed listening to this. It's a fun paper. We'd encourage you to read it. I think, again, the insights are quite practical because it basically says that, don't let people override forecast. Basically, let them flag particular time periods as having special events, and then you can, in the background have an algorithm estimate kind of what that means. That seems to be a very effective way of integrating human judgment with algorithms. And it's also a fairly simple way for companies to do so. So I hope you enjoyed this video. And thank you so much, John and Becky.